My story didn't start here. It didn't start with what y'all see today. It did not start with some positive guy that just randomly pops up on your timeline with a beard. My story did not start with a guy who goes to the gym almost every single day. Not for an aesthetic thing, but more so just to prove to the enemy that I'm still here. My story did not start with a guy that posts a reel and maybe 5 people will be touched, or maybe 100 people, or 1,000 people, or 1,000,000 people will be touched. That's not where my story started. My story did not start with a guy that it can be well put together and can articulate things in a extremely impactful way. That's not how my story started. My story did not start with someone that is in a position of influence at work that can shift things and change things. That's not how my story started. My story did not start with being able to shift the atmosphere in any space that I walk into. My story did not start by being a smile to everyone that walks up to me. My story did not start with me being a listening ear to those that come towards me so that I can help them to mend the pieces of their life. My story did not start from me being one that in my presence there's a mantra or this mantle of healing that is over my life. That is not how my story started. My story started from a very dark place. My story started from seasons and years and years and years of struggling, trying to figure out my purpose, trying to figure out how I was supposed to fulfill it. And even in the moments that I felt as though I was doing what God was calling me to do, there were so many moments and days of just being unfulfilled, feeling like I wasn't accomplishing anything. My story did not start overnight. So many times we live in this culture, this consumer based culture, that everyone thinks that you can just simply step out there and all of a sudden you're supposed to be successful at everything that you do. And unfortunately, that's not how life works. Life doesn't work with you starting to do something one day and then all of a sudden just some random viral moment happens and you take off. And if it does start that way, then chances are it won't last long. There's so many instances where we can see people that are called by culture, but the internal work has not been done to help them to sustain where God is trying to call them to, or where the people have in essence pulled them to. When we are pulled and we have not been processed correctly, we can't handle the weight of where we have been taken to. I say that because right now you may be in the place that you are being processed. And that process, unfortunately, it does not always come with a label that the other side of this is going to take you to somewhere miraculous or somewhere beautiful or somewhere amazing. Many times in that process, it can feel like you're not going anywhere and nothing's going to ever happen. Many times in that process, it can feel dark. It can feel hopeless. Many times when you are being processed, it can feel like you are on the backside of a mountain and no one is able to really truly see what is happening on the inside of you. That's how my story started. My story started with being in a place of being raised by a mother that had mental health issues. And I talk about this openly because she talks about this openly. Having to walk on pins and needles because I wasn't really sure what would set things off. My story started with a father that died when I was young. And so I had to mutter through life trying to figure out what a man actually was supposed to be. My story started with a stepfather that was dealing with so many different things that were haunting his life. that many of those things were taken out on me through abuse. My story started with a marriage that I failed. I failed because of all of the doubts, insecurities, fears, undealt with trauma, and things that I just could not content with in my own heart. My story started with overwhelming my son with a bunch of love, probably too much so because I was trying to give him what I didn't have. My story started with paying people's light bills and paying for people's rent and losing my own stuff because I was trying to help other people because I learned to people please. My story started with almost dying, and really probably I did die, and the doctor said that he thought that it wasn't going to be life after what I endured. My story started with thinking that that was the end. My story started at what looked like the end. When I look back in the scripture that I lean upon for my life's examples, there are so many stories where I read that are similar. When I look at the story of Moses and there being a decree to kill all of the male children that were born, that was a heck of a start to a story. His mom had to throw him into this basket and throw him down the river. He had to be sent off by his mother, not in her warm embrace, but that wasn't the start of his story, the end of the story. His story didn't end or didn't suddenly just evaporate or reach this pinnacle the moment that Moses was fighting the Egyptian that was trying to kill the Hebrew, that he ended up killing him. That wasn't the end of his story. When I look at Joseph, I look at his brothers not liking him, rejecting him, jealous of him, envious of him. And many times when people are envious of you, you don't know that they're envious of you because they never say that, but yet their treatment of you is less than par. That wasn't the ending of his story, thank goodness. That was the beginning of his story. He goes on and he was thrown into a pit. That wasn't the end of his story. He was thrown into a prison. That was not the end of his story. He had to go through process. When I look at David and his brothers rejecting him, his brothers not really believing in him, those that were around him weren't celebrating him. They weren't sharing his stuff on social media. They weren't hyping him up. He didn't have friends that were hyping him up. Many of us today, we're looking for our friends and family to share stuff and to pump us up and to be our hype men, and they're not being that. You're in good company because neither did David. But David believed what was inside of him. He horned in on the gifts and the tools that were inside of him. And that's what eventually allowed him to rise to the place of being the king that God had always anointed him to be. That was his story. Jesus' story did not start when he was rejected by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It didn't end there. It didn't end at the moment that they sent him to the cross. We know that 3 days later he of course rose back up, and he rose with all power in his hand. There is a process to everyone's story. And right now you may be in the process. You may be in the process on the way to a better part of your story. You may be in the process to build what God is going to use to help others, because in truth, we are all fully connected. I believe that there was a moment that I began to identify that God was using what I was going through to build a story that was going to be bigger than what I could have imagined. And I believe that moment came when I was in the hospital bed. And I had this conversation with God where it was, God, I have already endured a lot of hell. Why do I have to go through even this? now. And I just remember in that moment, there was this nurse that came to me and she said, "You're going to be not just better than you were before, but people are going to see you and they're going to want to know how." And it was in that moment that Revelation 12 and 11, I guess, really pointed out to me that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of our testimony. We overcome them by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. Without a testimony, you don't have a story. Your story doesn't end where you are now. It becomes a part of this collective tool that helps someone else to overcome. When I look at all of the stories of Moses and Joseph and David and Jesus and all of those that were in the Bible, it becomes this collective montage of stories that help me when I'm going through something that I need to get through. It becomes healing to me to read those words. And in the same way, you become a living epistle. That's all that's happening right now. Your story is being written page after page after page. But my goal today is to tell you that there is a side where the story changes, where you overcome because your story is shared, it is seen, and someone else is helped. And I know that many of us just want to come out so that we can feel better. But your coming out isn't just about you feeling better. When you come out of the things that you are going through, you help others to see the way more clearly. Where you are and what you are enduring right now isn't just about you. And I think that when we become self-centered, we lose the essence of understanding that our story and what we are enduring is not because God hates us. It is not because God is mad with us. It is not because God has forsaken us, but it is because God is building a story. I often talk about context and how when we read scriptures from the ending point, forgetting that there are moments where these individuals had to endure the pressure, the pain, and the things that they probably wish that they could have avoided. But those things were necessary for what God was doing in their life. If you want to know how to become successful and how to grow and how to get to a better place, it's by sharing that story. That story that many of us are still embarrassed to share. That story that many of us will use pride to hide behind. We are so prideful that we won't share that, hey, I am struggling. And maybe God needs that part of your story because someone else that is watching you move through the vicissitudes of life needs to hear that there were bits and pieces of your story that didn't seem to connect together. They didn't seem to make sense. And in some cases, they were very hurtful. But your story was given for God's glory. Your story that God has given you that is being built even right now, even where you are placed right at this very second, this will be used for His glory. Nothing is ever wasted. Not one tear that you've cried, not one person that has rejected you, not one breakup, not one repossession, not one foreclosure, not one firing, not one health scare, not one child that seems as though they're wayward. The whole story is going to be used for His glory. The whole story. Your story does not end with where you are Just as your story did not start with you being successful. I want you to think about this for just a moment. If you were to write yourself in the Bible, and you were to write all of the events and details that you have endured, and you were to see how the hand of God has guided you through each one of those processes, through each one of those things. Maybe he didn't give you $1 million. Maybe you're not married yet. Maybe you don't have the business yet. Maybe you're still struggling with the place of healing. But I want you to look back at your story at just how God has kept you through each of the individual sectors of your life. And if it had not been for God that was on your side, that you would not have made it. If it had not have been for the peace of God that found a way to rush over your heart so that even in your darkest moments, he was there with you and he was drying your weeping eyes. So often we want to see the end of the story and we don't realize that God's timing is perfect. He knows exactly when and how to maneuver you through so that he can get the glory. And I don't know where you are right now. I don't know what you may be facing. I don't know what you may be dealing with. And I am not trying to tell you that it does not amount to anything, but what I am absolutely telling you is that this is only a part of your story. There is a destined end because we are all predestined. The only way that story will come into being a blessing to those that are around you is two ways. One, if you change your view and you stop pointing back at what happened to you as things that are crippling you. You know, I was raised in the home with two brothers, and we all went through the same circumstances, and each one of us look at our circumstances a little bit differently. You can go through the same thing that everybody else is going through around you, but there are multiple ways that you can look at what you endured. I choose to look at what I endured as God was with me. And I choose to see the various moments that seemed low. I choose to see them as these pivotal moments where I recognize the growth and development. I can promise you that what seemed like the worst part of my story, when I look back, I learned the greatest lessons. I became a better man. I became closer to God's plan for my life. I don't know where you are in your story today, but what I can tell you is that it doesn't end here. You are the missing link to someone else's story. And when you share your story without shame, that's the second part, without shame, without ego, and without pride, your story becomes a liberator for someone else that is going through. God is using you for his glory. This is not the end of your story. Something much more beautiful, much more grand. Just like Joseph coming from that pit to the prison and eventually to the palace. Just like Jesus going from the cross into being one that would liberate thousands and millions and billions of people because of the power of his blood. You just sharing your story will liberate someone else because we are all connected. I want to encourage you today, wherever you are in your story, this is not the end. God is processing you for what he promised you. You're being processed for the promise. We overcome by the words of our mouth and by our testimony, by the blood of the Lamb. Thank you so much for watching me today. I am praying that wherever you are, that you and your family are doing well. Thank you for being subscribers, for watching. I'm praying that you have been blessed. For those that want to be a blessing towards me, there is a link that is down in the comment section or down in the bio somewhere around there. And thank you for even considering that. Thank you for each person that follows, that sends me messages. I love you. We are one family, and I love you so very much. Until next time, remember who you are. This isn't the end of your story. God is processing you for the promise. God bless you today.